This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, we're going to start with a prayer as I always do, and I'd like to kind of expose you to different prayers here. You know, this time it seems like there's so many people that are sick or suffering from some kind of sickness or illness that I always have liked this prayer. It's called Prayer of the Sick for Vocations. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Lord, you know my condition. You know my sickness and pain. You know too, Lord, the hurt and pain of all the world. Your healing presence is shown in a special way through the lives of priests. We need many, many more. We need priests to visit the sick, to cherish the elderly, to comfort the dying, to be with the poor and suffering, to be compassionate and sincere, loving and holy. Call men this day, O Lord, to live their lives as priests. Share with them your concern for us. Share with them your healing love, that they might know it in their lives and share it with all the people they touch. Call men this day, O Lord. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Okay, great. Looks like we have about 20 on the call tonight. Tonight we're going to talk about the content of club officer training. But before I do that, I want to touch base on some things that came up in the last session. First, I mentioned the Serra International YouTube channel. And I think it's very important as district governors and leaders of Serra that you familiarize yourself with that. You know, it isn't a pure thing. You need to just plug in Serra International if you know what you're looking for, maybe a speaker or a priest or a bishop. But there are some great videos on there. And I think you're going to see the Serra organization move more and more of the training and also the presentations at like the rally and the Serra International conventions to that. And one of the nice things about YouTube is that you can download the YouTube video onto your computer. So if you want to play it at a club meeting or some kind of event, you can do that without being connected to the internet. You know, all you need is basically a projector or something that people can view it on. So take some time and familiarize yourself with the Serra International YouTube channel. Second, last time we had a question about whether district governors can see into other clubs to see who the current officers are. I think Bill Stoll raised this question. I got an answer from John Liston, and he said that at the current time, the district governors do not have authority to see into other clubs. But if you call the Chicago office, they'll do a printout for you of all the officers in the clubs that you cover. And I think what I'm going to do in February, around February 1st, is ask the office to print that out for all the district governors, and then I'll send that out. And that would give us basically the months of February and March to make contact with clubs to double check that what we've got is accurate in terms of names and email addresses. And then also, it's really important at that point when you talk to the president of those clubs to, you know, think about this is that we're doing this training in April, but the group that we really want to train are the incoming officers who may not be coming in until July 1st. So what we need to know is who those people are, and we need to have the presidents. That won't be in the portal because they're not yet officers. What we need to do is have the presidents forward these invitations to those people too. So that'd be something important for you to do. We had a question from Juanita Smith about new clubs, and Juanita's had the outstanding success with starting up the Oklahoma club. But she wanted to know, you know, she said, I mentioned there that we should just have clubs start acting like they're a Serra club. And she wanted to know, can we call them a Serra club before they are? And I've thought about that, and I think my answer is no. I think we should call them a Serra club in formation. I think that would be a better way to describe it. Does that make sense, Juanita?
Yes, yes.
Okay, those were the three questions that popped up, and if there's others, just email me like some people have done, or just get to me anyway, and I'll answer those. I'll be at the rally next week. Hopefully I'll see some of you there. So let's go back and jump into club officer training content. I broke this into two parts because there's so much to cover here. And you might be asking yourself, what are the reasons that I need to know the club officer training content? Well, there are really two reasons. One is, if you want to be a good district governor, you got to be able to answer questions. And you're going to get questions all through the year from various officers and clubs. And I think you'll find that most of the answers to those questions are in this content. So it's important for you to learn that. And you're going to get a chance to learn it twice, because tonight I'm going to go through it on a fairly speedy basis. And then I hope you'll sit in when we actually do the club officer training in April after Easter. And it'll be a slower pace, but you'll be hearing it for the second time. But I think the information is really important for you to absorb as a district governor. And the other thing is, you might be called on at some point to actually teach this stuff. You know, historically, it was the district governor that put on all the training. I think that will probably change a little bit, but you're going to have clubs that don't attend the training. I'll tell you right now, and you're going to have to go out to those clubs and find some way to do the training for them. So that's why we're going through this with you. Okay. These are slides that I'd actually use in the club officer training. And I start with sort of an overview of everything we're going to cover. So there's kind of 4 key areas. The first one is Serra. It's the big picture, and also the big picture of U.S. vocations. We talk about the mission and history. We talk about Serra International, the Serra Foundation a little bit, U.S. Council for Serra, and the status of U.S. priesthood vocations. And that would typically be the first session of the club officer training. And then the second session would be club operations, leadership, and the event planning calendar. We're going to try and cover both of those tonight. So we're going to be speeding through things here at a pretty fast pace, but there'll be a lot of slides that we don't really need to spend a lot of time on. And then next week, we're going to talk about vocations and programs and membership and communications. And usually those are the vocations and programs is the third session of club officer training, and membership and communications is the last session. So, and I already talked about treasurer training. We're not going to cover that a lot. We're going to cover a few things that presidents need to know about that, but that's going to be done separately because the treasurer training is so technical, I guess is the way I'd put it. And most district governors have not been treasurers, so it doesn't make any sense to try and pretend to be a trainer there. And the final one is the Serra International Foundation rep. We're trying to get all clubs to have those. We haven't been real successful yet, but that's going to be a big push this year. And that training is going to be handled by the foundation itself, I think in June or July. So we're not going to touch on those things either. Okay, I always start off with the objectives of the training, and basically it's twofold. First is to provide information, and the second one is to inspire people. We talked a little bit about how you inspire people last week. You know, we suggested that maybe you start with a mass, or maybe you have a vocations director or a priest give a talk at the beginning, or maybe at lunch during a training session. The way I do my inspiration is by reading these little vignettes from To Save 1,000 Souls. That's a book by Father Brannon. I think I showed it to you last week. It's this one. It's a great thing to have in your toolbox. The readings are about 2 to 4 minutes long, but they're really kind of very poignant, and they all have a great point to make. So that's the way I do my training there. And you can see there, I listed what the stories are on the pages that they start on if you're interested in reading there. Then we go right to the mission, and we just repeat the mission: to foster and affirm vocations to the ordained priesthood and vowed religious life, and through this ministry, grow in our Catholic faith. And then I always point out to people that there's really 3 distinct missions that are built into that statement, even as simple as it is. The first is to foster new vocations. The second one is to affirm and support existing vocations. And third is to increase our own holiness. And we need to accomplish all 3 of those mission prongs in what we do in our clubs. Then I jump over to the person for whom Serra is named, St. Junipero Serra. And I have a slide here that basically goes through his life. It's kind of what you would consider to be a standard sort of a bio. I don't spend a lot of time on that because I don't find that people are as interested in that. But I do go through 5 things that I think made St. Junipero Serra unusual. First was that he chose a life of humble service. A lot of people don't realize that he didn't become a missionary till he was 35 years old, which was halfway through his life. Before that, he had an easy, cushy job as a professor of theology and philosophy at Lulean College in Spain. But he leaves that, he gives up all that certainty, and he goes to a life of uncertainty and danger. He also suffered constant pain as a missionary, something that I think a lot of Serrans can relate to. Um, he was bitten by a serpent or an insect right after landing on the east coast of Mexico, and it caused his leg to ulcerate and swell, and his leg never healed the whole rest of his life. In fact, it brought him close to death twice. But in spite of that, he traveled 25,000 miles either walking or on the back of a mule. And it's a pretty incredible statement about his fortitude and persistence in accomplishing God's will. He also believed in the power of persistent prayer. And I usually relate a story here of the beginning of the missions journey in California. When Junipero Serra got to the first stop, which was the current day San Diego, they were in desperate condition. They'd missed their rendezvous with the supply ship. They were out of supplies, out of medicine, they're out of ammunition. The natives were hostile. And basically, the commander of that decided that they would immediately turn back and abandon the mission. But Junipero Serra convinced the commander to wait 9 days until the Feast of St. Joseph in order to turn back and call the thing off. And so for 9 days, the Franciscan monks and friars prayed a novena to St. Joseph. And on the 9th day, the Feast of St. Joseph, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, which I think is significant, they spotted the sails for the supply ship, and the whole journey that led to the establishment of the missions in California continued. He also was an incredible advocate for the indigenous people, in spite of what the media would have you portray there. And I give some examples of some of the things he did. I think he was kind of a pain in the neck for the Spanish military and the Spanish colonists and the Spanish authorities. He was always kind of arguing with them and protecting the indigenous people from their exploitation. And then finally, I talk about the significance of the bell in Serra. I don't think many people remember this, but Saint Serra had a special technique. When he landed to form a mission, it was usually an area where there were no people, no indigenous population. And they picked these spots basically because they were good mission places and also defensible from a military point of view. And so the first thing he would do is have one of the monks hang a big bell up in a tree. And he would start ringing this bell, and they would ring it continuously for days. And you could hear this bell for miles and miles, and the indigenous people heard it and eventually came to see what the strange sound was. And that's when they would befriend them, give them food, treat any illnesses they could, send them back to their villages, and ask them to invite their friends to come back to the mission. It was kind of an ingenious way in a time when there wasn't any good communications to call people to Christ. So those are things I think I really like people to remember about St. Serra. Then I talk about a history of the Serra organization. It started in 1935, but in 1951, the really significant event occurred when Serra became an official apostolate of the Catholic Church. And in fact, it is the only lay apostolate officially aggregated to the church. And what that means by aggregated is that we are actually part of the church. We are under the authority and structure of the Vatican. And as a result, we report to the bishops and to the vocations directors. And another important thing to realize about Serra is that our role is to be the leaders on the vocations effort. We don't have an exclusivity on vocations work in the church. I once was holding one of these sessions, and I remember a lady came on and she said, you won't believe this. She says, we have a parish vocations committee that is taking the Serra tools off the Serra website and using them. And they're not paying us anything for it. And she thought that was terrible. I said, a lot of people would think that's a pretty good deal. That's what we're trying to do, is get these parishes to pray for vocations. I said, we don't have an exclusivity here. And so the way we lead is we lead with our own efforts. We lead by encouraging and supporting other vocations organizations in the Catholic Church, like Knights of Columbus, who are great for vocations, and parish vocations ministries. And then we try to lead by engaging all Catholics, even those that will probably never become a Serran, in helping create a culture of vocations. Then I go through the structure and the organization of Serra, and this chart is one I always use. But basically, I explain that Serra International is broken down into basically 10 councils, of which the U.S. is one council. And then that we have an Episcopal Advisor. Our current Episcopal Advisor is Cardinal Tom Collins from Toronto. The current president is Michael Bragg from Ohio. The president elect is Greg Schweitz from Omaha. And that we have an executive director, John Liston, in Chicago at the Chicago office, that he has 3 full-time and 1 part-time employee. And that those John and those 4 people are the only ones in Serra that receive a salary for their Serra work. All the rest is volunteers. If I go back here and just look at the councils for a second, you know, it's interesting what's not on that list to me. One of them is there's no council in Africa, which has an incredible number of Catholics and generates an incredible number of Catholic priest vocations. And the other one is that with the exception of Spain and the UK and Italy, there are no Serra clubs or Serra council in Europe, which is was amazing to me. I think of that as being sort of the rock foundation of the Catholic Church, but it is not. And I think those show that there's a lot of work yet to be done. And then I explained there are about 12,500 members worldwide in 398 clubs in 46 countries. And then I usually show this slide. This is a Serra International financial overview. And I show this because I think for a long time, we didn't share this information with members. And I think it left them in the dark and everybody was wondering what's going on? You know, what is the status of things? And this is a really simple slide. It's money coming in, money going out, whether it's a gain or loss. Is there ending cash in the bank statement? And is there any interest-bearing debt? And so what I try to establish with this are 3 things. Is first, that Serra International is fiscally managed in a good manner. It basically operates on a break even. Second, that it's financially sound. It has some cash in the bank. And third, that it has no interest-bearing debt. And those are the same points I'll make when I get to Serra US, but that's the real purpose of this. Now, the NAs that are in this, it's too early to have some of these numbers, but by the time club officer training takes place, I'll have these filled in with actual numbers. But I do think it's good to share this information on a real simple basis so that people know what's going on. Then I talk about the value of Serra to local clubs, the fact that our mission statement is not limited to the US, but to the worldwide Catholic Church, and how Serra spreads the model to areas where no vocation effort exists, how we bring Serrans together once a year at an international convention, and we coordinate Serra activities with the worldwide priorities of the Vatican. And then based on that, I show them what the upcoming international gatherings are going to be. Of course, you people know this. We have a Serra International Convention this year in Toronto in July, and next year it's going to be in Thailand. Then I jump from Serra International to the Serra Foundation. And I put up here the mission of the Serra Foundation. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, except I usually make people make note of the fact that the first 2 prongs of the mission closely parallel the first 2 prongs of Serra itself. You know, the first one is to foster and promote new religious vocations, and the second one is to fund formation programs for people that are already in consecrated religious life. So there's a parallel there that I think makes a lot of sense. And then this is some information that I got last year from Tim O'Neill, and this will be updated as soon as I get this information. I think they finalize it in February, so for the club officer training, it'll be updated. But as of this point, they've given over $3 million since 2005. $2.6 million in assets invested, and those are all invested according to the guidelines of the USCCB, and that we had 180,000 in donations received by the foundation in 2020. Again, I'll update this slide once I get information on 2021. And again, here I'm telling you what I tell the club officers, but I still think it's important for you to know this. And then I go through kind of a history of the foundation grants that have been given out, how much money gets given out. And you can see here kind of a record of 2019 to 2022, how much goes to US organizations, how much has gone to organizations outside the US. And then there is a page that I usually attach, and it's page 9A. that should be in your materials, or 5A, and I show them the actual grants that have been given just so they get a flavor of who these organizations are. So if you look at the grants that are going to be paid in 2022, these were just recently approved by the Serra International Board. You can see that the Pontifical North American College in Rome got the biggest amount at $25,000, and usually they do receive $25,000 from the foundation. The Institute for Priestly Formation in Omaha got $10,000. And you can go down here. There are some, the Diocese of Kibongo in Rwanda, and Jesuit Eastern Africa, Sisters of St. Joseph of Tarbes in Africa, the Serra Club of Salem, India, Crozier Fathers in the Congo and Indonesia. So they're pretty interesting, and they're all places that we wouldn't know about as just an individual club or a vocations committee or something. And I always encourage people to try and give a little bit to the foundation every year, both individuals and clubs. It's just an easy, convenient way to meet our obligation to the worldwide Catholic Church on the Serra mission. And then the one last thing to remember about the foundation is that it isn't just a matter of making donations to it, but there's also an opportunity for grants to be given out. And so if you have in your district, you have seminaries or convents or houses of formation, or even diocesan vocations offices that have unique programs, you should encourage them to apply for a grant. That needs to be done online by September 30th of every year. But it's another function, I think, that we have to help those people understand some of the resources we have available to help the vocations effort. Okay, so we've looked at Serra International, we've looked at the foundation. Now we jump down to the council level and look specifically at the U.S. Council. And I always like to tell people who are the current bigwigs in the council. And so our current president is Richard Arians, and he'll be in that role until July. And then I take over for 2 years. We have an Episcopal Advisor because our council is so large. That's Bishop Tom Daly from Spokane, Washington. So Serra International has its own Episcopal Advisor, Cardinal Tom Collins, but our U.S. Council has its own separate Episcopal Advisor, Bishop Tom Daly. And then the way that the U.S. Council is organized is in 9 regions, 9 geographic regions, and they're laid out on this map here. Gives you a rough idea of where the regions are. Each region has a regional director. And then within the regions are broken down by districts. And in total, over the 9 regions, there are a total of 44 districts. So there's a total of 44 district governor positions in the U.S. And right now, I think that 41 of those are filled. We still have 3 vacancies at this point. There are over 7,400 Serrans and about 198 clubs in the U.S. And the only thing that I would comment on this map, I'll see if I can get it corrected before the club officer training, is that Louisiana, which was on this map shows as being in the south central region, Texas, has been reassigned to the southeast region. And that had to do with some personnel that made some sense there. So, but anyway, it's kind of a feel for how things fall out there and how they're organized. Okay, and then just like I did for the Serra International, I have a U.S. financial overview, and I do the same. It's the same structure. It's revenues, expenses, whether there's a gain or loss, whether they have ending cash, and whether there's any interest-bearing debt. And again, those are things I just like to show to people. I think they're interested in knowing those things. And I think it's important that people know that basically we operate in a fiscally responsible way, that we operate at a break even. And that in our case, for the Serra U.S. Council, we actually have a pretty good balance in our ending cash. And that's because of some bequests that were given us in people's wills. And then we have no interest-bearing debt, as is the case for Serra International. And again, this chart will be filled in when the actual numbers for 2021 are available. And then I talk about the value of the U.S. Council to local Serra clubs. First, it's the repository of the wisdom of Serra. You have Serra meets, you have training programs, you have the officer and club manuals. It's also a clearinghouse for new ideas and problems, the national workshops, especially the rally. national conventions when we have those, and the Serra magazine, which is published with Serra International. The place I spend most of my time here is on bullet 3, which is that the U.S. Council communicates the priorities of the U.S. bishops with respect to vocations work. And at the current time, the U.S. bishops have 3 key priorities for Serra. First is to provide support materials for the annual vocation awareness programs. There's 4. You'll know these when I say them. There's Priesthood Sunday, which is in September. There's National Vocations Awareness Week, which is the first week of November. There's World Day for Consecrated Life, which is coming up here at the end of January, beginning of February. And there's World Day of Prayer for Vocations, which happens on Good Shepherd Sunday. It's about 3 Sundays after Easter there. So we provide support materials. And if you ever go to the serraspark.org website, under Tool 11, you'll find all the support materials for each of those 4 vocations awareness events. The second one that they're really keen about is the Newman Connection. We actually started this program. It was called College Connection for Catholics, and Judy Cousins started it. And it is intended to keep young Catholics connected to their faith when they go to college. And the reason the bishops think this is so important are really twofold. One is that too many young Catholics that go to college lose contact with their faith there. Almost 80% do. And the other thing is that happens to be an age when a lot of discernment for religious vocations is occurring. So what they want to see is those people stay in contact, both so that they stay in the church and also that if there are vocations, that they have a better chance of being heard by the individuals. But Newman Connection is something that now our role is to go out to the Catholic high schools, that's the easy one, and get them to provide a list of all their graduates and the colleges they're going to. And the tough one is to go for the kids that went to public school, that would have been in RE programs. And the only way to get that is to go parish by parish. And it's tough, but it's really important to get those names into the database for Newman Connection. And then what they do is they sort them and send them out to over 5. I think they now track 5,000 colleges and campuses and the Catholic youth ministries. And they tell the Catholic youth ministries which kids are coming their way. And those have some connection with the college so that they can get emails, and they contact those kids right at the beginning of the school year to get them involved with Catholic activities. But it's something that only the Serrans do. I mean, if we don't do it, it just doesn't get done. And then the third one is to develop these digital resources for vocations directors. Vocations directors change over. Almost 1/3 of the vocations directors are new every year, and there isn't really any training program for vocations directors other than a couple of days at the NCDVD conference in the fall. And so what the bishops ask is for us to put together sort of a digital toolbox for those vocations directors. And that's what serraspark.org is. I know it's used a lot by clubs and it's used by parish vocations ministries, but it is intended primarily for vocations directors. And the information that's on there is designed so that it can be tailored to a diocese or a parish, whatever the vocations director wants, to start a specific vocations program in that area. So that's where I spend a lot of the time is talking about these. And then there's the other things that are sort of, you would expect. There's the professional support for all volunteer clubs with the maintenance of membership records and the database and mailing labels, the liability insurance, and maintaining the website. So that's my slide on the value of the U.S. Council to Serra clubs. And then I have a slide. This is just basic. I think it's important that we say these things. Sometimes people don't know, but about our semi-annual due structure. And basically, it breaks into 3 categories. For the very first time when a Serran joins, there's an initiation fee of $11.75. That's for all member categories, whether you're a spouse, under 35, or a full member. And it basically covers the first semi-annual billing period in which the application and the check are received. Now, if you think about this, if you had somebody that was going to join Serra on, let's say, June 27th, you might be tempted to just hold that over until July 3rd and then send it in, because that $11.75 covers the whole 6-month period. And then for that, you get a new member kit and a pin. But basically, it applies to the semi-annual billing period in which the check and the application form are received. And then after that, for full members, the dues are $46, and that's a combination of both Serra International dues and U.S. dues. And for spouse and under 35 is $23. So that just gives them some basic information to go to. I kind of think of these slides as a little bit of a reference book when they're done. They go to if they have questions. Okay. Oops, we've already been there. Go this way. And then I just talk a little bit about our dues at work. This is intended to sort of help answer the question of what do I get for my dues? But again, it's things like the Newman Connection, the development of the sarahspark.org website, which was expensive and is expensive still to maintain. Parish Vocations ministry training, which we're just rolling out. The 7 Serrans prayer teams for vocations directors. Building partnerships with Focus, NCDVD, NCYC, and others, and Serra Meets. Those are just examples of some of the things that the Serra International and U.S. Council dues accomplish. I always like to have a slide in for the priorities that the current U.S. president has, and Richard Arians has had these same two for the last 2 years. It's to re-engage clubs coming out of COVID in our mission work, and second is to ramp up the parish vocations ministry training. And then I have a slide that I call challenges for Serra, and these are purely my personal viewpoints here. And I don't try to answer these. I just think it's important that people realize that they are challenges for Serra. The first one is obvious. It's the COVID-19 impact on clubs meeting in person and their membership. The second one is we have a visibility awareness problem in most parishes. Too many Catholics don't even know that we exist, and the few that do don't have any idea what we're really about. So that's something that we need to deal with. We have a name confusion problem. We're too often confused with the Sierra Club. And of course, now there is an option for clubs to use the word saint before their club name, which I think is an assist to avoiding that confusion. And the fourth one is that we have very limited Hispanic and other ethnic representation in Serra. You know, we started as a white Catholic businessmen's club, and we have evolved some, but we haven't evolved completely from that. And the minorities that have come into the United States and are now making up a huge chunk of the Catholic Church, like Hispanics, are not well represented in most Serra clubs. So those are some of the challenges we face. And again, I don't try to solve these for people. I just think it's important that people know these. So then I take a break and I ask, that's the end of the big picture on Serra. I ask for questions, comments, or discussion. Then I jump over to the status of U.S. vocations. And I think it's important to let people know that we still have a crisis in terms of the shortage of priests in the United States. Even though there's a lot of good things happening, we've had steady to increasing priestly ordinations. We've had steady to increasing graduate level seminarians for the last 25 years. But still, when you take into account the death and retirement of priests, the total number of diocesan priests is still declining, and it's down 30% since 1965. Well, in that meantime, the Catholic population is up 50% since 1965. And just to make note of this special fact of the Hispanic growth of the church, now 1/3 of U.S. Catholics identify as Hispanic, but only 5% of our priests are Hispanic. And most of those were not born in this country. The direst need for priestly vocations in the U.S. is for American-born Hispanic priestly vocations. That's what we really need right now, people that are equipped to deal with the bicultural church that we've evolved into. This is a chart. There's actually an updated chart, but it's almost identical. It just continues out in a steady trend, and it shows seminary enrollment trends. A lot of people look at it and think, oh, what a crisis. You know, look at all those priests we had back in 1965 and 1967, how it dropped away. But, you know, I look at this chart and I look at it and I see, when you realize that back in the 60s, the Catholic Church had it pretty easy. And our country was still a country governed by Judeo-Christian values. And it was right in that time period that all those values got to be turned on end, and we became a really secular society. So if you heard I can't think of his name, the speaker at the last rally from North Dakota. Anyway, he basically said, you know, we basically had a tailwind back in the 60s and 70s, the church did. And now we've got a fierce headwind. It's no longer a Judeo-Christian society, and we are under attack. And what's really great about this chart, I think, is it shows that in spite of all that, we have been steady in terms of priestly formation that's gone on in the country. And then this is just a table, but I think it gives you some idea of what's been happening. This is from the Serra research, and I actually have a Excel spreadsheet that I've summarized a lot of the Serra research over the years. It's on page 9A. But basically, you can see there that from 1995 to 2020, the number of new priests was sort of had an average of about 500. It ranged from about 450 to 550. But because of death and retirement, you can see that the total diocesan priests have dropped from 32,000 in 1995 to 24,600 in 2020. So it's a pretty steady drop. Almost every year has shown a drop. And it tells you sort of how important our work in terms of fostering new vocations is. Okay. Then I have two last slides that deal with vocations here. The first one, it's important for all Serrans to know this about vocations. And they're basic, but you can't repeat them too often, I don't think. The first one is the most important. It's the Holy Spirit that calls the vocation, not us. Our job is to create a culture of vocations so that the call can be heard. Key influencers have been identified in studies as primarily priests and spiritual directors, and many spiritual directors are priests. A distant second is mothers, and then friends and so forth. But it's very important to keep young people in contact with priests, is the way I interpret this. The time of most serious consideration is age 17. That's why the Catholic bishops are so keen on the Newman connection. Time spent in Eucharistic adoration was identified by many, many people who became priests as critical. And of course, for that to happen, there has to be Eucharistic adoration, and that's something that Serrans can help make happen. 60% of priests were altar servers, which is one of the reasons that many clubs have altar server recognition and awards programs. 50% of Serrans discern out. This is not a failure rate. It's important for Serrans to understand that. Can't tell you how many meetings I've been to where the vocations director gives a report and he says, well, so-and-so has decided to drop out of the seminary, and there's this, whole collective sigh in the room. And that's not wrong. That's the way the whole process is supposed to work. It's a discernment process to figure out what God's will is for each person. And it's important for us to realize that. And a lot of the people that discern out, I'll tell you, have become some of the strongest lay Catholic leaders in the Catholic Church. 92% of priests are happy about being priests. That's higher than any other career. I hate to compare a priest to a career, but that's higher than any other career you'll find. And finally, it's important to realize that the inability to marry is not a cause of the shortage, because mainline Protestant churches have the same shortage and they allow marriage. Too many Catholics naively think that this is the silver bullet to solving the priesthood shortage. And the fact of the matter is, the evidence is out there that it's not. The only silver bullet is to create a culture of vocations through prayer. And then the very last thing in terms of an overview of vocations, I started this last year. I'd like to talk about the Labouré Society. Most Serrans don't even know about this organization, but Labouré is a national Catholic nonprofit organization that rescues Catholic vocations from the problem of student loan debt. We have a lot of kids that have piled up tons of student loan debt. And basically, if they decide to become a priest or a sister, one of the things they look at is what that debt is. And those organizations do not have the ability to take on that debt or to pay it off. And so Labouré works with those kids to try and find ways through cash management and careful living to pay that debt off. And they reach out to individuals. They can be Serrans, but they can be others too, for contributions. And the contributions are not paid to the individual, they're paid to the Labouré Society so that they remain tax deductible. And then individuals receive credit, but they may not get exactly the amount of what they have actually attributed in terms of other people making donations. But that protects the tax deductibility of what the Law Break Society does. So it's just something that's important for Serrans to be aware of. Okay, so we've touched, that was basically session 1 of what would be club officer training. We're going to jump into session 2 here. I always close with some inspirational reading, and in this case, I used Pope Francis's talk to Serrans in 2017, and that's actually on this slide, although it's probably too small for you to read, but you can get a copy of that off of the leadership resource page. Okay, club operations, leadership, and the event planning calendar. Always start again with a prayer and with an inspirational reading. In my case, another vignette from To Save 1,000 Souls. Then I jump into this. It's how clubs are basically chartered by Serra International. They're governed by their bylaws and they have a club number. But the most important thing to realize is that clubs are organized by dioceses, not by parishes. So they work with and for the bishop and the vocations director. They are our bosses. Our focus is on prayer, fellowship, and service. This might be somewhat controversial, but I firmly believe this. Some people don't understand that Serra's primary function is not to recruit vocations. We don't go around and ask. We may go around and ask on a selective basis for young people to consider a vocation, but that's not our primary function. Our primary function is to create a culture of vocations. Remember, it's the Holy Spirit that calls the vocation. We create that culture of vocations so that the call can be heard. And then I go to just a little slide on club bylaws and the problems. We have a lot of clubs that have lost their bylaws. You'd be surprised how many, if you ask them, can't find their bylaws. And those that can, if they look at the bylaws, they'll find out that their club doesn't really operate according to them because the bylaws are so old. There's some important language that's missing from bylaws that the IRS requires for reinstating nonprofit status. And it would be a good thing for even clubs that have maintained their nonprofit status to have that language in as a protection. And as a result of all those things, we've had new model club bylaws that have been approved by the U.S. Council last April, and they are available again on the leadership resource page. And that site there, although I know it's hard to read, is where you can find that. Then I talk about how clubs are structured. Nothing magical here. There's a board, there's a president-elect, and past president, 4 key vice presidents, vocations, programs, membership, communications. There's a secretary, usually a treasurer, hopefully a club foundation representative, and trustees. Club meetings, again, nothing magical here. Board meetings are usually quarterly, although I know some clubs that meet monthly. Then there's the main member meeting. There's usually 2 per month. There's a program meeting that's a little bit more formal in structure and usually has a program speaker. And then there's usually a less formal gathering at a first Friday or first Saturday Mass. And during the year, in place of these, there are also annual events, and that tend to take the place of the monthly program because you get too much in a month if you don't. And there are 5 of those. One is the ordination Mass, the priest appreciation dinner, a bishop's appreciation event, a sister's appreciation event, and a seminary and lunch or dinner. A lot of clubs do at least some of those if they don't do all of those. And here's a slide on how clubs finance their activities, which I think was sort of an eye-opener to some people. We did a survey of club presidents last year in January, and I asked, we got 80 out of 195 clubs to respond how they finance their activities. And this is what came up. About 60% of the clubs are what I call low dues and the user pays meal costs. And I actually grew up in a club like that, and I didn't know there was any other model that people followed. So our dues in the St. Serra Club of Des Moines are basically it's $120 per year. And that covers the Serra International, the U.S. Council dues, the region fees, and then about $19 of that 120 is left over for the club to operate on. And then when we have a monthly meeting, we've been fortunate to have it at an insurance company, and they have a cafeteria, and you can go through the cafeteria and you can order a full-blown meal if you want, or you can order, like I usually do, just get a bottle of water or a cup of tea. But you could get to choose how much you want to spend on the meal, but you pay it. And you only pay it when you go. So That's the predominant one, although I would tell you that it's mostly medium and smaller clubs that follow that. Then there's a model called the high dues, and the club pays meal costs. And this is a situation where basically you pay a pretty significant amount of money, and that amount that covers not only the dues to Serra International in the US, but it includes all the food at all the meetings during the year, whether you attend or not. And that's about 40% of the clubs. And I would say that those 40% represent some of the larger clubs. And then there are some others that have just popped up that are just interesting that I thought I'd pass along. There is one club I know that has no dues. They don't charge any dues. They have a fundraiser, and they actually sell cinnamon buns once a year. And they make enough money off the cinnamon buns to pay Serra International, U.S. Council dues, sometimes their region fees, and to fund what the programs they have are. I just was kind of floored when I heard about that. And then we have some clubs, at least one, that has no dues. But what they do is they ask for donations. And so they send out an invoice with a suggested amount. And then they ask people, but please give what you can, because some people can't afford this. And the interesting thing about that club, it's the Lehigh Valley Club in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, is that the treasurer, Jane Herrera, tells me they actually get more money with this donations approach than they do with charging dues to people. So it's just an interesting way to look at how to fund club activities. Then we talk about two kind of off-book, what I call off-book operations in Serra. One is called Friends of Serra, and those are people that are unwilling or unable to give the time to Serra, but they are willing to make a financial commitment. And then there's another group, which is the opposite. They may not have the financial resources to pay the dues or to pay for the meals, but they do have the interest in Serra, and those, we call those emeritus members. And basically, in both cases, we treat those people as sort of a quasi members by giving them, they might get publicity in the newsletter, they get the newsletter, they're invited to attend all prayer functions. And of course, the advantage of these is that there's no dues obligation to US Serra or the Serra International by the club. But the other side of that is there's got to be a caveat on overuse, because when those fees, those dues aren't paid to Serra International and US Council, all the programs that we're trying to fund don't get funded either. So there needs to be a balance in terms of how that's used. Okay, and then here's some thoughts on officers that just kind of mine. What I recommend is consider 2-year terms for key officer positions. And I would include all positions there with the exception of treasurer and perhaps communications IT, because those are specialty areas and not a lot of people have those skills. You might let those people stay on. In fact, the saying in Serra is that once a treasurer, you're a treasurer for life. In a lot of cases, that's almost true in most clubs. So you want to caution throwing new members into officer roles too quickly. You don't want to be slow about getting them engaged in Serra. But I've seen too many clubs where somebody shows up at a meeting and the next meeting they're voted as the president of the club. And that's not fair to the club, and it's not fair to the individual. It burns people out, and it doesn't really let people be effective in terms of their management capabilities. And the important thing here is that you have to identify new officers by about April every year in order for the leadership training. You know, we do this leadership training, and the goal is to train the new officers. It's kind of a waste if you think about it, if all we're training are the officers that are just finishing up their terms. So it's important for clubs to start identifying their new officers early in the year, and that's something that district governors can help encourage to happen. Okay, then I focus here on the president, and we're getting a little tight on time, so I'm going to go through these pretty quick, but there's 6 key roles, I think, for the president of the club. The first is to provide leadership. It's to make sure that the officer group is acting as a team and not solo players. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. The second is to inform and involve the bishop and the vocations director. Remember, they are our bosses, and we need to give them information if they're going to be of assistance to us in coaching us. You need to engage all club members, and you need to ask, and we're going to talk about a way to do that. You need to encourage members to participate in district, regional, national, and international Serra events. The reason for that is that people that go to those things become so inspired and realize that there's so much more to Serra than just the club, It's just contagious within the club. The president has to make sure that the Serra portal is updated with both officers and email addresses. And sometimes that responsibility is either the president's or the treasurer's. And a final one, which is kind of maybe a soft focus, but an important one. It's important that presidents exude the joy that comes from doing God's work through our special ministry. Really good Serra clubs, you can feel the joy in them. Okay, I talked about the need to be a team. The reason for that is, if you think about it, we have too many clubs where somebody says, oh, membership, well, that's the vice president of membership's problem. Oh, vocations, that's the vocations vice president's problem. Or communications, the newsletter, that's the communications vice president's problem. That's not the case if you think about it here. You know, vocations depends on communications, because communications is the way that they get information out to the individuals on what we're trying to do. And communications helps with participation in parish vocations activities. And it also helps membership to engage new members. So membership's important to vocations, communications is important. On membership, they depend on the vocations to create awareness. They depend on communications to inform new members of what's going on in the club. They depend on programs to have good quality programs so they can retain new members. And they depend on the treasurer to finalize all the membership and notify them when a member leaves. And the same is true as you go through this. Communications depends on programs. You know, you can communicate all you want, but if you don't have a program laid out for the year, what are you communicating? Come to the meeting next month. Now, that's not enough. You know, they got to know what's going on. They got to know the topics. It's got to be planned out. So they depend on good programs. They depend on vocations to promote the activities to the members in the parishes, and they depend on the membership and the treasurer. Programs depends on communications, obviously, and also programs needs the help of everybody to plan quality programs. And finally, the treasurer depends on membership to get complete application forms and the checks, and communications to update email lists. Let me just give those as an example of how you can't operate in a silo or a solo basis. Then one of the other most important things I think on the president's checklist is to make sure that there is every year at the beginning of the year a master schedule created for monthly meetings that is set up in advance for the coming year. And this is not the program's vice president's responsibility. This is the whole team's responsibility, I think. Every officer should be involved in setting up this master schedule. And the speakers should be identified, the topics should be identified, and the topic should be on our mission, fostering and promoting priesthood and religious vocations, some way connected to that. You got to coordinate it with the bishop's schedule for all the events that you want the bishop to attend. That's where it usually starts. And then you have appreciation events, you have national awareness events, and you have special events like ordination masses and annual retreats and seminary visits and masses to see Serrans. And usually in a lot of clubs, those are handled outside of the vice presidents. There's a specific person that handles those. So again, it's a really critical thing to lay out the whole program for the year in advance. And really, if you don't have this, you can't build and inspire and build fire in the club and let people know what's really going to be happening and actually make them put it down on their calendars in advance. Then I have a table here. A lot of people complain about being unable to find speakers or topics. And I just put together a list here. There are two independent columns here. One is possible speakers and one is possible topics. I just want to highlight a few here that I think people overlook. Under possible speakers, I think that more clubs should spend one program a year inviting the Knights of Columbus Vocations Vice President to come. You know, Knights does a lot of work for vocations. And I have a feeling sometimes that if we both the Knights and the Serrans knew what we were doing, if we coordinated, we could do a lot better job. So I think it would be good to invite them so that they can learn what we're doing and we can learn what they're doing. And then on the possible topics, you know, I think that too many people think it's just always a vocation story. Somebody told me once, if you show me a club that has only people come and talk about their vocation stories, I'll show you a club that's going to die in 5 years, because you're going to run out of vocation stories. You don't want to hear the same ones over and over. So you got to find other topics there. And one club in particular, I know, they decided for a theme one year that they were going to ask back a lot of the priests and sisters who had shared their vocation stories, but they wanted them to talk about their personal prayer life. And they came back and they said it was one of the most inspirational years they've ever had in terms of speakers, just listening to what these people do in terms of their personal prayer life. There's other ones like, what is a spiritual director? You know, we hear that all the time. And you hear it from the discerning process that it's very critical. But I don't think a lot of Catholics really understand what spiritual direction is. And a final one I just give as an example. I say seminarians are always hungry, and now with Zoom you can get them. And we had a great program where we had 4 seminarians over at the North American College in Rome, and man, they were fighting to see who could be on the Zoom program, even though they had to get up at 2 o'clock in the morning to match up with our time. But they were all anxious to talk about that, just go through a day in their life at the NAC. And it was really interesting. So there's all kinds of things you can do there. You don't have to just have vocation stories, and that's my point. Okay, in terms of vocations, I think a president on his checklist ought to have you involve every Serran in at least one vocations activity. I'm talking about a prayer-based activity usually. So, within Serra, we kind of have 2 groups of vocations activities. We have vocations activities within the club that are primarily for club members. And then we have vocations efforts going on in parishes where we're trying to get parishioners who aren't Serrans doing these things. And you can find all the information about those in the serraspark.org website. In terms of membership, the president's checklist, and again, this is not, if you think about what these things are, awareness, that's not the membership vice president's problem. That's primarily the vocations and the president's problem. Inviting new one is everyone's responsibility. And then there are people that use special prospects information and invitation events. If you can get the bishop to come, that's great. New member induction, ceremonies, and member retention. This is often overlooked, but there's a new member orientation that's about 36 minutes long. It's a video. It's available, and it's a great way to teach new people what Serra is all about and how it works. And then when you talk about welcoming, we need to talk more about welcoming in Serra. Introductions, name badges all the time, every single meeting, even if, you can use the disposable ones, and building friendships. And finally, to engage new Serrans immediately in one vocations activity. And the 2 I recommend, one is either a weekly or a monthly rosary for vocations, and the second one is to spiritually adopt a seminarian. If you could do the second one, you will find that you will have a lifelong Serran on your hands there, somebody that won't leave Serra. Communications within the club, you have directories, the annual meeting program, monthly newsletters, email reminders, websites, Facebooks, all kinds of social media, and maintaining good email lists. And on the outside, you have bulletin announcements in parishes of vocations activities, Catholic newspapers, Catholic radio, and the website or Facebook. In terms of the president's checklist for treasurers, I think the first one here, the first 3 are pretty obvious what the financial are, but a lot of people overlook the fact that the treasurer becomes the de facto person who retains the records of the organization usually. And it's important for treasurers to make sure that they always have a second signature on accounts in case something happens. We've had a number of clubs here recently where the treasurer passed away suddenly and nobody could do anything because there was nobody else authorized to sign on the checking accounts for the club. So it becomes a real mess. There should always be a second signature on the accounts. The annual tax filing ought to be checked off by the president. Portal maintenance should be checked off. And in terms of an audit, a full-blown audit every year, I think is just impractical. But what I usually recommend is that treasurers bring an exact copy of the bank statement to each board meeting. And if they report that there's $8,252 in the account, it's not going to match exactly with the bank statement because of timing differences and checks that have come and deposits that have happened. But if it says 9,000 or it says 8,000, that's okay. If it says 1,000 and the guy says there's $8,000 there needs to be some explanation of what's going on, and clubs need to look into that. Okay, we talked about the annual bishops meeting on the Tuesday session. I'm not going to spend any more time on that, but I like to emphasize that for the president. And then engaging all members about asking is, I think the key is to ask for specific limited tasks. And I want to share with you here pages 18A and B in the materials which is something that I think it was a club down in the St. Louis area put this together, but it's called the Count on Me approach. It's two parts. The first part is a survey that gets mailed out to each individual Serran in a self-addressed stamped envelope for return. And people are just asked to check on the areas where they can help. But they break these things down into little tasks. So you don't have to agree to be the vice president of Vocations, but you might agree to be help with Priesthood Appreciation Sunday, or with Mass lecturing or Eucharistic ministering on the Serra Masses. And then those come back, and this page 18B, if you look at it, is an Excel spreadsheet, and it just has basically across the top all those items that a person could check, and they're grouped by vocations, programs, communications, membership, and other. And then it's got the members' names down the side, so it becomes just like a single spreadsheet, and you check that, and then basically you pass that on to whoever has check marks. So if there's people that have check marks in the vocations area, you pass those names on so that the vocations vice president is aware of that. And then it's really important to remember all these things are a complete failure if you don't follow up. Somebody volunteers and nobody contacts them, they'll get turned off. Okay, that's it for club operations and leadership. The last area is club strategic planning. And there's two things here I want to talk about. One is the annual club goal setting. This is something that Mark Bonkowitz put together. It's page 19A. And it basically says, set some priorities or you won't get anything done. The second section here, I wish I had more time to spend on it, but it is so valuable. It is something that the Duluth Serra Club did in 2016. They were concerned they were sort of slowly stagnating, and they wanted to reboot the club, and they went through a strategic planning process. And so what you've got here in the first group of pages are the questions, and under every question, they summarized every single different response they got. Take a look at that. You'll be surprised. This would apply to a lot of clubs out there. And you won't be surprised at what you hear in here. So all that information is done. But here's what they did that was really unique. On pages 19I and J and K, they went one step further, and based on the survey results, they put together a strategic plan with, I think, 6 focus areas, and an assignment of who's responsible for each thing. And I'm telling you, this is invaluable to read. But I want to read the very first one. This tells you how good I think this club was at the strategic planning process. The very first focus area, which I think most clubs completely overlook. Focus area number 1 is help members get to know one another better. Now you're talking about a club that's been in existence for years and years and years. And probably everybody just assumes that everybody knows everybody. And that's one of the worst assumptions you could make. You know, when I joined Serra, I didn't know hardly anybody in the group. And it took me 2 years. And it wasn't finally until the president started having everybody introduce themselves at the beginning of every meeting that I was able to start putting a name with a face. But that friendship, you know, that welcoming attitude and helping people to get to know one another is a really critical ingredient of a successful Serra Club. I just mentioned it because I think a lot of people would have overlooked it, and they didn't. They caught it, and it was their number 1 goal. Okay. Now we're down to the very last item here, which is the event planning calendar. And those are the last 6 pages of the document if you printed it out. This is something I put together when I was a district governor, because when I was president of the club, I was going through this thing of trying to put the program together for the year. And it seemed to me like we were just reinventing the wheel. Somebody had to go look up when was Priesthood Appreciation Sunday this year, and when is the World Day for Consecrated Life, and when is the diocesan ordination this year, all kinds of things. And I thought, you know, this is going on all over the country and really all over my district. I think we could put a lot of this stuff into a standard format and just give people the information that they need. And this is laid out in 2 columns, you can see. The left column is called events, and that would typically be all the things that your club's going to do. And it's in blocks, so for each month, it would give you information about what's going to happen in the club that month. And then over on the right column is called planning. Now, the planning column is a little unusual because the planning column is a 3-month look forward. So, for example, on the one that I've got here, the very first page, April 2022, you can see into the planning column, it's planned for World Day of Prayer for Vocations on May 8th, which is the next month. And if you get down here, and some of these, basically, they're all 3 months in advance when you start the planning process. So, because what you find, what I did is when I did this as a president, I found I was just chasing my tail going from one event to the other, not realizing how quickly they were coming up, and there wasn't enough advanced planning. And then there are some other things at the bottom block of on the left-hand side under events, in the italics bold, I have all the dates that you have to worry about in planning that month. So for April, I've got April 15th is Good Friday, 16th Easter Vigil, 17th is Easter, and 24th is Divine Mercy Sunday. And I'll tell you why I did that. It's because when I was a Boy Scout leader, I had to put together programs like this too. And one year I put the whole program together in July of the year, and I scheduled a canoe trip with all the boys in May. And I put down deposits on the canoes. And little known to me, I scheduled it on Mother's Day. And let me tell you, I got no end of grief for what was going on there. And I decided I was never going to do that again. I was always going to know when Mother's Day was. And so I've got Mother's Day, Father's Day, Christmas, and what day of the week, what day of the month it is. So all those things are built in here. But it's really, and people ask me, they want to get the Excel spreadsheet so they could try to adapt it to their own club. You could do that, but it's kind of awkward in Excel, to be honest. The formatting is kind of fragile. But what I recommend is that a president would print out 2 of these, and then just take out a pencil and go down with the officers in a meeting and just go through the left-hand side, the event side, and say, okay, we don't do first Friday, so scratch that out, but we do a first Saturday, so it's going to be April 2nd. And then and when's our main meeting that month? And are we having adorations for vocations? So it becomes a scratch pad for putting together the club master schedule. And then the second copy is something that I would bring to every board meeting, and I would go through the blocks for the next 3 months and make sure that we are covering the planning that's going to take place in order for the things that are going to happen 3 months from now to happen with some organization. So that's the way I would use this. It's ready to go for the next 2 years, and you're free to use it or to pass it out into your clubs if you want. Okay, it's 8:39. I've gone 9 minutes over here. I think that's it for tonight. I apologize. I didn't take many breaks for questions. I'll stay on here for anybody that wants to, but next week we'll be dealing with the second part of club officer training, which is the content regarding the vocations function, the programs function, the membership function, and the communications function. Even though we talked about those tonight, that was discussion in the context of what the president needs to know and do in those areas. We'll be talking about what the vice presidents need to know and do in those areas as we go through this next week. So that gives you a little flavor for what the club officer training is, at least half of it. Are there any questions or comments that anybody has? See, I've got 2 chats. Let me check those out. Oh yeah, here's one about, yeah. Gino's reminding me, it was Monsignor James Shea that gave the presentation on the headwind, tailwinds. And somebody made a comment here about Serrans are largely an urban group, and that's one of the problems. We need to figure out how to get people from farms and small towns to join. Okay, good comments. Any other questions? Remember, you have to unmute yourself if you want to talk.
Hey, Mike, I had a question. What about when you were talking about the dues, what was that last point you made?
The last one was, it's one club, and what they do is they send out a recommended amount to contribute for dues. And then, but they say, but please pay what you can, understanding that there are people that can't afford this amount. And as I understand, it's a small club, but the majority of the people pay more than the suggested amount. And there are 2 people that benefit from that in terms of not being able to financially pay the full amount. They pay what they can. Does that make sense?
Yeah, right.
It's
Okay,
a
yeah,
gamble.
that's
You're
all I wanted to
gambling on
know.
people's goodwill and willingness to support the whole group.
Mike, it's Jane Herrera. We're not
Well,
gambling. We're trusting in the Lord to provide.
Club, right?
I know I was going to get in trouble for that, Jane. Jane is the treasurer of that club, Bill. And she corrected me that it's not gambling, it's trusting in the Lord. And she's right. But it's an interesting concept that I hadn't heard of before I met Jane. Jane has a lot of interesting things going on in her club and ideas, but it's an alternative to the way most clubs operate. If you've ever talked to Ruben Gallegos, he's very much a believer that Serra should consider moving from dues to donations.
But they
Any
don't
other
have
questions?
cinnamon rolls like we do in Nebraska.
Yeah, I got to buy one of those cinnamon rolls sometime and see what they charge for them.
I'll have some sent to you.
Okay. Anybody else have questions or comments?
This is Moira. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Moira.
I just want to thank you for the time you've taken to develop this program, because it gets me excited about all the pieces of Serra. Knowing that when I joined, I asked someone, is there a program that can teach me how I should be a vocation director, VP for vocation? Is there someone to help us with communications? And no one in our leadership could tell me that there was anything. So
Yeah,
it's exciting. It's exciting to hear the basics. Okay, whether it's for the district governor.
You're getting the skewed Mike Downey view of everything. You know, there are other opinions on how this thing can be done, but I think this is a place to start for a lot of people.
Yes, and leadership has to take the first step. And so by you defining these pieces and putting it into a presentation that others can glean from, it's a wonderful beginning step. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Anybody else have a comment or question?
I've got a question, Mike. We've got a situation. You were one of your slides talked about how clubs work, how a club works.
Yes.
And we've got it's based on diocese. Well, we've got a club that's close to the border of a diocese, and there are people in the next diocese that are interested in joining the club in our diocese. Because the next diocese, the one that they want to join, is this 60-mile drive to a club meeting. Whereas if they join our club, it's a 3-mile drive. And the parishes are that close too.
Yeah, those are tricky situations. That's Ralph Hoboyer talking from Colorado there. But we have a similar situation in Iowa. We have our Council Bluffs Club, which is really, they don't like me to say this, but they're really kind of a suburb of Omaha, and it's a split sort of a split allegiance there. But they do manage. I mean, in the end, the club ends up working so closely with the vocations director of the diocese and the bishop that it has to maintain kind of a pretty much a diocesan focus. And as long as people are willing to do that, there's nothing wrong with that. But they need to realize that up front, is that if you're in a club in one diocese, it's unlikely that if somebody from the other diocese, the vocations director or the bishop asks for something, I mean, that club may well say, well, that's, our responsibility is to this diocese, and we need to report to them to keep our priorities clear. So I don't have a great answer on that, Ralph, but it's a tricky question.
Yeah, we're talking about individuals rather than clubs.
Right.
So that might make a difference. Anyway, I'll probably talk to you about it next week. I have to think about it.
Okay, good. Anybody else?
Mike, it's Kathy from Minnesota.
Hi, Kathy.
I definitely feel what he just said, because we are a club in one diocese and my church happens to be in another diocese. And for several years, we had both bishops coming to our bishop meetings, and it was just a treasure. But lately, it hasn't happened. And so it might be a good topic for us to look at, and how to bridge two dioceses, and we don't have another club in the other diocese. So yet, 3 miles away, I'm there.
Right.
It's not hard. It's not hard. I think it's a great topic. I'd love to be involved in something like that, to talk about
Well,
that.
it's a possibility that we could discuss that at the roundtable gathering of district governors at the rally, because I don't have a set list of subjects there yet. We'll probably try to identify those right in the first 10 minutes. So
That'd be great, and figure out how can we stay on top of it.
right.
All right. I love it.
Good. Anybody else?
Yeah, Mike,
Hi, Mike.
on that topic, I had a conversation with Richard not too long ago, and he told me then that Duluth and Superior have that same situation going on.
Yeah.
It may be that I'm in Des Moines, and that's never really occurred to me. I've just seen that Council Bluffs has somehow worked with it, but maybe that is a subject that we should discuss next week in the roundtable.
Sure.
Get some thoughts on it.
I'd vote for it.
Okay.
I'm not going to be there, though, except in spirit.
Okay.
I'll be there, Kathleen.
Hey, go for it.
Okay. Anybody else? Why don't we call it to a close? I'm going to read something unusual for a closing comment here. It's sort of a prayer, but it's actually the Serran Pledge. And I don't remember taking this when I joined Serra, but I may have. It was 17 years ago, but I thought it's interesting. I came across it. So I'll treat it as a prayer here. We'll just start in the name of the Father and Son and Holy Spirit. In virtue of my baptism and confirmation, I take my place among the people of God. I pledge to fulfill the responsibilities which correspond to my state in life and to practice the virtues of faith, hope, and charity. I pledge to use the grace of my personal gifts, guided by the light of the gospel and in the mind of the church, to carry out my mission in the world. I accept the Serran responsibility to promote vocations to the ordained ministry and religious life, and to offer support and encouragement to those vocations. Mary, Mother of the Church, pray for us. Saint Junipero Serra, pray for us. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. It's always good to be reminded of your pledges, although it's a little scary sometimes. Okay, guys, thank you very much. I'm going to end the recording here. I'll stay on if anybody has any questions.